Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to the City of Rochester Hills Fire Department headquarters. My name is Bill Cooke. I'm the Assistant Chief with the Fire Department. Myself and the men and women of our organization, as well as our elected officials, all welcome you here today for a day of remembrance. A day of remembrance for those that lost their lives and for those who gave their lives. We remember and we will never forget. I thank all of you for setting aside time from your everyday busy schedule and for taking a moment to pause and reflect upon the events that took place 17 years ago on September 11th, 2001, the day that changed our lives forever. On September 11th, 2001 at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 with a crew of 11 and 76 passengers was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center by terrorists. The tower remained standing for 102 minutes, then collapsed at 10:28 a.m. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 with a crew of 9 and 51 passengers was flown into the South Tower of the World Trade Center by terrorists. This tower remained standing for 56 minutes and collapsed before the North Tower at 9:59 a.m. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 with a crew of 6 and 53 passengers was flown into the Pentagon by terrorists, creating a separate disaster in Arlington, Virginia. And at 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 with a crew of 7 and 33 passengers crashed into the ground near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers on the flight attempted to subdue terrorists. Nearly 3,000 victims lost their lives in these 4 attacks. These events created chaos, panic, and terror to the likes that many of us have never experienced. Firefighters, emergency service personnel, and citizens were tasked with many situations they never dreamed of having to face. They responded with speed, courage, and determination. They walked out of the ashes, then walked back into. Working past exhaustion, these individuals, knowing their brothers and sisters of humanity had perished, were able to maintain composure and complete the task at hand. Today we are here to honor all of the first responders that paid the supreme sacrifice, those who worked through the stress of these attacks and celebrate them in our memories. No matter how hard we try, words simply cannot express the horror and shock we feel over what took place in this nation on Tuesday, September 11, 2001. The 9/11 attacks will go down in our history as a day to remember. Let this memorial here behind me, here at our fire station headquarters, provide us with a daily reminder to take nothing for granted, to cherish our time with our friends and families, count our blessings, and to respect the freedoms we have as fellow Americans. Now, if you will all please rise for the posting of our colors by the Rochester Hills Fire Department Honor Guard. Please remain standing for the singing of the national anthem by Miss Ava Swieczkowski.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we've watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you. You may be seated. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank our elected officials for attending this morning. U.S. Congressman Mike Bishop, State Senator Marty Knollenberg, State Representative Michael Weber, City Council President Mark Tisdale, and all of our City Council members here in the front row. Thank you all for attending this special event. We appreciate all of your commitments to prioritizing public safety and honoring this day with us. We appreciate it. I'd also like to thank and recognize our fellow emergency services partners from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office if they're here. Thanks for coming. City of Auburn Hills Fire Department, which I saw, and the City of Rochester Fire Department. Thank you all for coming today. Now with our opening comments, I'd like to welcome City Council President Mark Tisdale to the podium.
Good morning. On behalf of the City Council and the 75,000 residents of the City of Rochester Hills, I'd like to welcome you to Station 1 for our September 11th Remembrance Ceremony. We are here to honor and commemorate the lives taken as a result of the unthinkable terrorist attacks on American soil on this day 17 years ago. And we are here to unite together as Americans and remember the irrepressible spirit on this, the day we now call Patriot Day. Eleanor Roosevelt once shared this wisdom: you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. No one could have imagined the destruction to come on September 11, 2001, but Americans are resilient, and out of that shock and devastation came something more. We countered fear with strength, courage, compassion, unity, determination, hope, and our story is not yet fully written. Every year on the anniversary of this course-altering madness, we choose to take what was delivered by evil and use it for good. We stand tall in strength, courage, and confidence. We stand together and do what is right. So today, on behalf of the City of Rochester Hills and its residents, thank you for gathering with us. We will always honor the heroes of 9/11 and remember those lives cut short. We will never be the same, and we will never forget. May God bless you, your families, and may God continue to bless our city and the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tisdale. Now I'd like to welcome U.S. Congressman Mike Bishop to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me today. First of all, I want to tell you how proud I am of our community for doing this morning and the emphasis they put on commemorating this very solemn day, this 17th anniversary of September 11th, as we remember and reflect on the attack that really changed the world. It's hard to believe it's been almost 2 decades since our nation watched in horror as planes crashed in the World Trade Center. We heard the news about the plane crashing in the field in Pennsylvania, and then the plane crash into the Pentagon. Those memories and images I will never forget, and I'm sure that everybody in this crowd would agree. It's one of those moments in our nation's history where all of us can remember where we were and what we were doing. Some of you may be in school, some of you maybe have been getting ready for breakfast or having breakfast that morning, getting ready for work. I actually was traveling that day and landed in the Detroit airport that morning. And I will never forget the looks in the faces of the people in that airport and the horror that I saw in their eyes. Last night I attended a ceremony at the Oakland University. Students at Oakland University have a tradition every year where they plant flags for every person that was lost that day on September 11th. It's really a beautiful sight, but it does make you realize just how many people died that day when you see that many flags on the grounds. It occurred to me at that time that most of those students don't have any recollection of 9/11 and that day. I was proud of them for being there because they want to remember. They want everybody to remember, the next generation. And despite the fact that they may not have a specific recollection themselves, they want to pass that memory on and not forget those victims that we lost and also those that were left behind. We also want to remember how heroically people were that day, how heroically they acted that day. They went in to rescue victims, save lives, ordinary citizens in many cases running in. We also had emergency response personnel that were on hand, police, fire, all of whom risked their life. In fact, there were fire trucks actually buried in the rubble next to the World Trade Center. That's how they charged into to save people in a way that risked their own life. All of this played out right before our eyes. That's part of how painful this process is, to have a day like this, to watch it across the nation, every television, people riveted watching what was going on. This is the kind of tragedy that could have torn us all apart. But as President Tisdale indicated, it was one of those things, I think, in our American history that we will look back on and remind us of how it united us and how it brought out the very best in us. I can remember all those flags, if you'll recall. Every flag across the town was proudly waving. The trucks, fire department trucks, all had flags on them. It was really a proud moment in our nation's history. And it made us realize that despite our many differences, we can come together. And today, as we look around and we see what's going on, the incivility and the public unrest in many ways, we realize that while our nation may be divided more than ever right now, it is a time in our nation's history on 9/11/2001. We can go back to that and see there is so much more that unites us than divides us. I recall also on this day of the many people that died that day and so many left behind, all the heroic acts. Flight 93, remember those words that we heard from the passengers? They were taped live time. They weren't scared. They said, "Are you ready?" And then someone said, "Let's roll." And they took their own lives and the lives of the 40 passengers around them and into their own hands and did what they thought was right, which is to save their country and further devastation. They overcame their hijackers, took over the plane, and tragically the plane was lost in Shanksville in that countryside field in Pennsylvania. The presumed target was just 18 miles away, by the way, 18 minutes away. That was Washington, D.C. And I don't think any of us can really truly imagine how many lives they saved, sacrificing their own. So I want to remember today, and I know all you are here today to do the same, to remember the heroic acts, to remember the lives, to remember the other families that were victims of this horrible attack and this horrible day. But I also want to remind you that this should be a day full of hope. We Americans come together and remember our fallen and our brave, and really give thanks for being in the home of the free because of the brave. Thank you all for being here. God bless all of you. God bless this incredible community, and of course, God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Congressman Bishop. I would now like to introduce State Senator Marty Knollenberg.
Thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts. When I was younger, I remember older adults saying how everyone remembered the exact moment when they heard President Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963, just a few months after I was born. I never really understood that expression until September 11th, 2001, 17 years ago. And I too remember that moment, as I'm sure many of you do as well. And for me, I was just finishing up a workout at a local gym, and I remember getting ready to leave the facility, and there was a number of people gathered around a TV set, and we were all stunned by what we were seeing. As mentioned before, the World Trade Center was hit, the Twin Towers, airplanes crashing, the Pentagon, people falling, people running, the smoke, the horror, the devastation that we were witnessing right before our eyes. That's a moment I will never forget. 17 years later, I still have not forgotten it. I remember calling my parents. My dad, who was a member of Congress at the time, was in Washington, D.C. along with my mom. And I remember the concern that I had for them with all this activity. And my dad couldn't say much. They wouldn't let him in the Capitol. And so they didn't know if they were next. I didn't know if they were next. And so it was a pretty scary moment for our family. I think we were all mesmerized by those events that day. And for me, I will share 4 such emotions. The first was shock, as I mentioned. How could this happen here on American soil? Up to that moment, the evil in the world had always been kept at a distance. We could choose to engage it or to not. Now there was no choice. It was thrust upon us here in our homeland, forcing us to change our interaction within our borders as it relates to security. The second emotion was shock. Nearly 3,000 of our fellow Americans had suddenly been killed, and their families were instantly shattered. Children no longer had a mother or father. The guiding force in their lives was gone forever. The third emotion was anger. And we are united as a country in our anger and our desire to see that justice be done. And the final emotion was admiration. And as we saw the courage of our first responders, it reminded me of the greatness of our people. The firefighters, the police officers, the paramedics, and average Americans running towards danger to serve their fellow Americans. All of these emotions of 9/11 are vivid, are real, and will be forever embedded in my memory. It is also a reminder to all of us, should be for all of us, that these first responders are always on call and are always prepared to step in harm's way at any moment in time. And for that, I'm thankful and grateful. I will never forget, and I know all of you will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Knollenberg. I'd now like to welcome State Representative Michael Weber to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to take part in this ceremony once again this year, and also honored to represent the people of the greater Rochester area in the Michigan State House. We are here to remember what happened on 9/11/2001 and to honor our courageous first responders. For me, the events of 9/11 bring me back to that day. I was working for the state of Michigan as a staff person, and I was in Washington, D.C., in a building near the U.S. Capitol when the attacks came. What followed was chaos, particularly when the Pentagon was hit nearby. I will never forget that day and the days and weeks that followed. There was fear of what was to come, but there was also a coming together of the people of this great nation. There were stories, heroic stories, of what was done to save lives and the courage displayed that day and in the days ahead. Earlier this year, my wife Julia and I were in New York City, and we had a chance to tour Ground Zero and the museum that is there now. It was a very moving experience that I would highly recommend to everyone. The museum tells the story of that day. It honors the victims of the 9/11 ceremony, or 9/11 attack, including many of our first responders. Because of that museum and local ceremonies like this taking place across the country, it is my hope that we will never forget 9/11 and why it is so important in our country's history, and the importance of continuing to come together as a nation like we did around 9/11. Thank you to Chief Canto and the Rochester Hills Fire Department for organizing this remembrance ceremony each year. Today we remember and we salute our first responders. God bless and thank you.
Thank you, Representative Weber. Now please welcome the Fire Department Chaplain, Deacon John Wright from St. Irenaeus Church.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here, and we pray together. Together we pray. God, we come to you today in remembrance of the lives lost to unspeakable violence, especially those on September 11th and in its aftermath. All of us were touched by this day, from the loss of loved ones to changes in the national mood. We remember our anger and fear. We remember our sorrow, salty water flowing from our eyes, grief at loss, at the deep pain and suffering of our sisters and brothers. But we also pray that this salty water will become seed for a better tomorrow. Like these seeds, we have hope that your kingdom of peace and justice will take root and flourish in our world. And we remember the fabric of life of which we are all a part. From workers at the Pentagon to the undocumented workers at the top of the World Trade Towers to people in Afghanistan who never heard of New York City. May we learn to sew together this fabric with unbreakable threads so that we may cling together in solidarity and such violence may never be repeated. As we remember, we also can remember what Jesus did as he walked among us. This is a gospel from Matthew after he fed the 5,000. Then Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After doing so, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they cried out in fear. At once, Jesus spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened, and, beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, "Oh, why did you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. We think today, in so many ways, we can think today about Peter. Peter can be our hero, but Peter went to meet Jesus, and when he was having a difficult time, Jesus stretched out his hand. So we think about all the responders, all the people that we've remembered today, all of you that have stretched out your hand in some way to assist those people at the original 9/11 and still assist people today. You stretch out your hand. You follow what Jesus showed us to do. So when all of you have stretched out your hands, we can be afraid, any of us, and we will never be quite the same since 9/11. But that doesn't mean we have to be ruled by our fear. Let us join today in solidarity of the suffering and compassion, remembering the people and events of 9/11 and what has transpired since. By sitting with our fears, may we find God. Let us pray by responding together to these invocations. And as you remember anybody that was there that day, you can say, "We remember them," after each phrase. Or remember people that you have reached out your hand as Jesus did. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick of heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the birth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. If anybody would like to share a name out loud of anybody that they remember reaching out their hands for, you can do that now. John O'Brien. We remember him. Anybody else would be welcome to do so. Or we just think of them in our hearts. And let us pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Amen. O Christ, beneath the fallen stones, O Christ, among the wreckage shorn, O Christ, within a world at war, arise from unforgiving pain and teach us how to love again. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Wright. The signal 5555 has been used in the City of New York firehouses since 1870. It signals a death, generally of a colleague, and tells firefighters to lower the American flag to half-staff. Before computers, dispatchers communicated with firehouses using a series of rings and gave the location of a blaze by a code assigned to the nearest intersection. A house watchman had to monitor the bells and decipher the message on paper. These days, a watchman monitors a computer screen, which gives the code for the intersection, the address, and the type of incident. The bells have been disabled, but a 5555 signal is still used. To this day, the code still has meaning. The dispatcher will say on the radio, a signal 5555 has been transmitted, and it is with regret that the department announces the death of a firefighter. Today, the Rochester Hills Fire Department will sound the signal 5555 in honor of the members of the City of New York Fire Department, the New York Police Department, and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The 411 emergency personnel who lost their life 17 years ago today. Rest easy, brothers and sisters. Now will you all please rise for the honoring of the colors and the playing of taps by Angelo Grappito from Stony Creek High School. Thank you. Please be seated. Now I'd like to introduce and welcome Chief of Fire and Emergency Services for the City of Rochester Hills, Chief Sean Canto, for the closing remarks.
Good morning. The streets have been cleaned and cleared, buildings rebuilt, fire apparatus have been replaced, but the effects of September 11th are still very much at the front of people's minds. One of the mottos after September 11th was, "We will never forget." What does that motto really mean? This motto can be seen on fire department t-shirts, stickers, plaques on the side of fire apparatus. But for some, the pain continues. I found a story I thought I would share with you. They were father and son. They were first responders on September 11, 2001, and now their deaths are being tied to heroism on that horrific day. Robert Alexander died of cancer related to his service at the World Trade Center after 9/11. This was a statement released by the Uniformed Firefighter Association of New York. His death follows that of his father, Raymond Alexander, who also died of cancer as he served at Ground Zero. Ginger, the mother of Robert and wife of Raymond, spoke proudly of the men in their family, pointing out that Robert is a third-generation firefighter. His grandfather and his father and him had 80 years of service in all to the New York City Fire Department. Now the Alexander family hopes that Robert and Raymond will be remembered for their big bravery and for their big hearts. Ginger didn't think it was real when she first heard the news while picking up her tea and bagel at the local coffee shop on September 11th. The fellow that owned the shop said, Ginger, get over here and look at this." And she said, "Oh, that's just a war of worlds like back in the 1930s. She was referencing when Orson Welles accidentally fooled the public with a radio broadcast. Then she watched as the first tower collapsed. After two airliners crashed into the World Trade Center buildings, her heart dropped. It was real. Ginger rushed to her part-time job at a local museum and told her colleagues that she was staying home. Then she immediately called her husband, Raymond, a New York City firefighter at the time, and her son, Robert, who was then a New York City police officer. Around 3 o'clock, Ray called and said he and Robert had touched bases, adding that she spent the rest of the afternoon answering phone calls from family members to reassure them that Raymond and Robert were safe. Once Raymond and Robert returned from Ground Zero, the Alexander family thought the horrors of 9/11 were behind them. But a year later, Robert left the police force and became a firefighter, serving as marine engineer at the fire department of the city of New York. In 2003, Raymond fell ill. Ginger said their lives were changed forever. Between 2003 and 2016, Raymond was diagnosed with seven different cancers. Then about 2 years after that, their son Robert was diagnosed with the brain cancer. They were totally devastated. He and Robert were particularly close because they had so much in common. In November 2016, Raymond died. Now Robert has died, leaving behind Ginger and his older brother. One of Ginger's recent favorite memories of Robert came in March. They spent 3 weeks in Germany visiting family. She was so glad to have that time with him. He started to stumble a bit while we were there, and when we got home, it was a downhill slide. In just a few months, her son's health worsened, and he had to use a wheelchair. Robert, an avid dog lover, had a 1-year-old puppy who seemed to have difficulty recognizing Robert as his health declined. So they would pick him up and put him in Robert's lap, and soon she was that close to him, she'd snuggle in his waist area and fall asleep. Ginger said, adding that her son was a wonderful baby, a terrific teenager, and just a humble human being as an adult. He worked behind the scenes all the time, and he was there all the time for everybody. Raymond and Robert represent the first father and son pair to die from 9/11 related illnesses years after the towers fell, said Gerald Fitzgerald, president of the Uniformed Firefighter Association. The Alexander family and the association said that the cancers were tied to the ash, debris, and carcinogens that were filled in the air while they responded to the World Trade Center attacks and aftermath. We had firefighters show symptoms very early after 9/11 in age groups that shouldn't be showing symptoms of different diseases and cancer. The impact of 9/11 isn't over. and it doesn't seem like it's going to be over for a long, long time. I can't imagine how the Alexander family feels, but I hope that the entire country will keep them in their prayers and remember what happened to them on that terrible day. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention, the World Trade Center Health Program, provides medical monitoring and treatment for emergency responders, workers, and volunteers who helped in rescue and recovery after the 9/11 attacks. The program also provides health evaluations and treatment for people who are in the disaster area. Research suggests that some cancers may be tied to exposure from the 9/11 attacks, according to this program. This program now monitors more than 48,000 police officers, hard hat workers, utility workers, and others who worked at Ground Zero. The fire department of the city of New York has their own 9/11 health program, with more than 16,000 of their members being monitored or cared for. And the federal government has listed more than 50 types of cancer believed to be related to the smoke and dust on September 11th. The Uniformed Firefighters Association also reported that 1,396 of their members have cancers associated with exposure, 5,723 have gastrointestinal issues, and more than 5,500 have airway issues, most of them current and former firefighters of the city of New York. Today we celebrate the lives of the 411 emergency responders that were lost 17 years ago today. And since that time, an additional 182 New York City firefighters have died from health implications related to September 11th. After the playing of Amazing Grace, we ask you to assist us in placing the 411 American flags around our memorial in remembrance of all emergency workers, police officers, firefighters, and EMS workers who gave their lives on that day and who continue to be affected even today. Thank you. Thank you. If you would come forward and help us place the American flags around our memorial, and after a brief moment of reflection, we're also going to do a housing of our new fire apparatus. Thank you.